You're disrupting my lounge! Security, remove him!
I'm not ordering your staff, I'm directing mine. Close the lounge. Effective immediately.
The label had been scraped away so cleanly that only a pale rectangle remained on the plastic-the-ceiling light until the rough edge caught the glow. Across the table, Claire Donovan watched him with the strained patience of someone who had already decided that the problem was not the food but the man questioning it. "The date is missing," Marcus said. And two other guests were served from the same cart. Claire did not look at the container. She looked worn brown shoes and plain jacket. "Sir, you are making other guests uncomfortable." Marcus placed the food back on the tray. Claire's smile remained, but the warmth behind it disappeared. She raised one hand toward the security desk. Marcus met her eyes. "I should not need authority for a safety-concerned matter." The security officers had just begun walking toward them when, 2 hours quite different, Marcus arrived at Silvergate International Airport. Shortly the canvas bag he had used when Horizon Crest Hospitality was still a rented office with second-hand furniture and more debt than certainty. He knew expensive clothing changed the way people listened, which was why he left his tailored suits and polished watch at home. An old brown jacket and leather shoes, softened by years of use. Nothing about him announced that he had founded the company operating the executive lounge ahead. At the entrance to the Horizon's Crest Executive Lounge, a young employee scanned his boarding pass. "Business class access confirmed." "Good mornings, Mr. Bennett," she said. Before she could wave him through, Claire stepped from behind the desk. The pause was brief, but it was not empty. "May your identification?" Marcus handed it over. Claire compared the photograph to his face, longer than necessary. He gave her the card. Behind him, a white man in gray asked for anything else. Claire Expass requested Marcus's confirmation emails, then asked him to open the Horizon on Crest applications and display his membership code. Each request came into smooth, professional tone. Tone made the difference harder to name and easier to defend. He noticed the employee made Claire lower her eyes. When the screen again confirmed his access, Claire typed a note into his profile. Marcus could not see the verifications, but he caught the words elevated inconsistent. "Is there a problem with my reservation?" he asked. "No problem. We are protecting the premium experience for all the keyboard." Another white traveler in a baseball cap was welcomed inside with a smile. Claire's expression stayed composed, though a faint stiffness entered her jaw. "We use professional judgment when additional confirmation is appropriate." It was not an answer, and both of them knew it. Marcus took back his identificax. Only the familiar pressure behind his ribs whenever suspicion was presented as procedure. Long before he had a title people recognized, he had learned how a room could question whether a black man belonged in it. Success had not erased private doubt. It had shown him how easily that lesson. The employee who first scanned him stepped forward. "I can show you to a seat," she said. Her voice was carried a warning she could not safely explain. Lena hesitated, then nodded. Marcus followed her through the lounge, noticing bright windows, open tables, and servers offering hot breakfasts near the main buffet, toward a frosted glass partition at the rear. As the door closed behind them, Marcus looked back at the green confirmation, still glowing on the entrance screen. The people operating it had decided that was not enough. A week before Marcus walked into the lounge, the Silvergate branch had looked almost flawless on paper. Its quarterly report showed a 95% guest satisfaction and fewer complaints than any other location in the region. Claire's name appeared twice in the executive summary, once beside a note praised cost control and again beneath a recommendation for Regional Manager of the Year. Marcus had spent enough said good performance rarely arrived without friction. A clean report did not concern him. A report with no visible human's office after most of the headquarters staff had left and opened the new customer care archive. The system had recently begun saving original voice messages, could classify or summarize them. The first recording came from a black attorney traveling to Richmond, but the pauses between her words carried the exhaustion of someone trying not to sound angry, because she knew anger would be used against her. She said she had shown her boarding pass and identification account, yet Claire still asked her to open a banking application to prove she had purchased the ticket herself. Guest required teen assistance. Membership credentials. Marcus replayed the message. The woman had not needed assistance. The second recording came from a black engineer who said he had been directed to a rear seating area, even though several tables near the windows were open. He had asked whether those tables were reserved. According to his message, Claire told him seating decisions were based on operational needs. Guest declined multiple available seating options. Marcus leaned back and studied the gap, the spoken complaint and the official description. The words had not merely been shortened. The manager's decision disappeared, while the guest became difficult. A third record involved a white traveler who complained that the pastry selection had run out before 9 in the morning. He received an apology, 15,000 loyalty points, and a follow-up call from Claire. The pattern sharpened. Complaints from white guests were treated as service failures. From black guests were more likely to be classified as confusion, sensitivity, impatience, or resistance to standard procedure. The same company had produced two versions of reality, and the version preserved depended too often on who was speaking. Joined through a place director, she had already noticed another irregularity. Mazzano. Silvergate was purchasing more premium food than the previous year. Yet, its reported food cost per guest had fallen. That can happen during a vendor transition, Rach said, though her tone suggested she did not believe this was one. Isn't the food being served? Or Rachel opened an ethics report, submitted under Lena Carter's employee identification. One showed unopened cases and smoked salmon, labeled community donations. Another showed an unregistered delivery van near the lounge's service entrance. The third, Stur had written only one sentence: "Please review before local management is notified." Marcus stared at the final image. A narrow strip of pea adhesive remained, suggesting someone had peeled it away by hand. Marcus refused to announce it. A scheduled audit would produce polished counters, updated labels, and employees reciting approved answers. He wanted to see the branch as an ordinary traveler saw it, before anyone knew the consequences had entered the room. Only Rachel and Thomas Reed, the company's chief legal counsel, would know where he was going. They would monitor the situation from headquarters and move only when Marcus gave the signal. You all asked. Before ending the call, Marcus looked again at the complaint records. "I don't know yet," he said. "Why I need to go without deciding the answer first." He had learned long ago that suspicion could point toward the truth, but it could also become the same kind of prejudice he was trying to expose. Document. He would observe and separate what felt wrong from what could be a note in his profile. By the time Marcus understood that the recordings had not exaggerated the problem, they had only captured were willing to describe. The frosted glass door closed behind Marcus with a soft click, cutting off most of the morning light from the main lounge. A silver sign beside in narrow capital letters. The name suggested privacy, quiet, perhaps even an upgraded experience. Its carpet was darker from years of foot traffic. The chairs were smaller and placed close enough that rolling suitcases blocked the aisle, releasing the sharp smell of cleaning solution and the metallic rattle of carts. There were no windows, only a pale wall. Broken carried a handwritten sign saying "out of surface." Marcus stood beside him, with her tablet held against her waist. The embarrassment he had seen at the entrance had not left her face. It had settled into something's comfort, worn by someone who had repeated an instruction she did not believe in. "You may sit anywhere in this section." The frosted glass. Marcus glanced. Empty towel were visible on the other side, palm. Lena unlocked her tablet. A gray message appeared beneath his name, Manager. Approval courier for surface reassignment. I would need, Lena nodded. Why? Her thumb rested against the edge of the tablet. Your profile was let the silence remain long enough for her to decide whether she wanted to say more. She did not so, but her eyes moved toward a camera mounted above near the wall and slowly looked around. A black woman in hospital scrubs cord stretched across the floor to the only functioning outlet. A black airport technician vest folded beside him, eating crackers from a vending machine package. Near the service door, a Lio businessman held a phone to one ear while a finger against the other to block the noise, beside an untouched cup of coffee. At the far end, an older black veteran cane. Each time a cart passed because the aisle was too narrow to leave it safely beside his chair. None seemed confused about where they were. Who had learned that asking too many questions could delay a flight. Through the glass, Marcus saw white couples choose at tables near the windows. A server greeted before they had fully sat down and pointed out the hot buffet. Another running shoes and a baseball cap. No one examined whether his appearance matched his ticket. He walked directly toward the espresso machine. Clothing was not the standard. The assumptions attached to the person wearing it were. Marcus asked when the reserve section had been created. 3 years ago, she said. It was supposed to be a quiet room for guests who requested less traffic. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Look toward the service door. The system flags the service door. Local management decides thus whether the guest should remain in the main. What creates the flag? There isn't one written reason. She lowered her voice. Sometimes it's a name that doesn't match what they expect. Sometimes the way someone asks a question at the desk. Sometimes it happens as complained at another location. Marcus thought of the records he had reviewed. A complaint that had already been rewritten could follow a customer into the next airport, but as evidence that the customer required monitoring. Can you remove it? He asked. The technical restriction mattered. An unfair judgment had been for a software permission. Even an employee who recognized the harm could not correct it without requesting approval from the person who had caused it. Marcus watched Claire enter the main room and greet a group of business travelers. Her posture softened around them. She laughed at something one of the men said, then personally escorted them toward the windows. When she glanced through the frosted glass and saw Marcus watching, she touched the earpiece of her radio and said something he could not hear. She read the message and drew a slow breath. I've been instructed to remind you that movement between service areas requires approval. Marcus had not moved from his chair. No. Will that reminder be added to my profile? Lena did not answer. Marcus looked at the guests around him, then at the polished reserve sign. The room had not been built to exclude them. It had been repurposed. Prejudice had not entered the system with a raised voice. It had arrived through drop-down menus, approval settings, and language vague enough to survive review. A server entered the reserve section. She placed the thicker stack on a cart bound for the main lounge and handed Lena a smaller laminated card. Lena brought it to Marcus. The card listed coffee, packaged fruit, turkey wraps, and vegetable soup. The boarding pass included full business class dining access, the same benefit advertised on Horizon Crest's website and printed on the signs outside. It is the menu assigned to this section. It is the menu wasn't my question. Lena pressed her lips together. Through the glass, servers arranged fresh pastry, scrambled eggs, smoked salmon, roasted potatoes, and bowls of cut fruit. In the reserve section, a metal urn of coffee beside paper cups, and the only food visible was sealed in a refrigerated cart near the service door. Marcus, that sunlight was reflecting off his laptops. A server apologized and moved him to a quieter table within seconds. No note was entered. Near Marcus, the black woman in hospital scrubs raised her hand and asked whether she could move closer to the working outlet. But Claire appeared at the door. All seating assignments are based on operational needs, Claire said. The woman glanced at 3 empty tables beyond the glass. We have provided an appropriate space, Claire replied, but a faint impatience sharpened the final word. The woman nodded and returned to her laptop. Claircus typed something until the door closed. Marcus waited and looked at the screen. The woman had asked once. Marcus felt anger rise, not hot and sudden, but cold and exact. He had spent years hearing executives describe bias. Bias as a series of misunderstandings here. A reasonable request had been converted into evidence of difficult behavior. Minute the main buffet raised his voice because the coffee station had run out of oat milk, apologized, and crossed him loyalty points. Claire offered him loyalty points, while a server, his frustration, was treated as information the business should respond to. The black woman's calm request had been treated as behavior they should record. How often does that happen? Marcus asked. Often enough that people stop asking. And the limited menus under Caris's elevated verification are not offered premium items. Unless a manager authorizes it, unless that written policy. Not in the handbook, then where does the instruction come from? Shift notes. Sometimes messages that disappear after the day ends. A cart rattled past them. The airport technician asked for hot food because his shift had started before dawn. The server told him the full buffet was reserved for the main service area. He looked through the glass, then down at his crackers. Marcus checked quietly. Yes. At another table, the Middle Eastern woman requested tea. She was told only coffee was available. A server carried a wooden box of specialty teas to a white couple. The differences were small enough to deny one at a time. Marcus asked Lena how guest satisfaction remained so high. She explained that surveys were sent automatically, but profiles marked if a manager classified the visit as incomplete, irregular, or interrupted. Thus, the guests most likeliest to remove from the data. Lena's eyes lifted to his. For the first time, Marcus saw something beyond caution in her expression. It was relief, slight but visible, that someone else had named what she had been watching. Why she glanced toward the camera. Because you noticed without making me explain why it matters. Claire appeared behind the glass, speaking into her radio while watching them. She placed a folded receipt beside Marcus's water and said in a service voice, "Your meal will arrive shortly." Then she walked away. On the back, written in blue ink, were 6 words. Check donation. A gig. He folded it once and slipped it into his canvas bag. Across the room, the woman in scrubs with her power cord stretched dangerously across the aisle. In the main lounge, the man who had complained knew coffee and smiled. Both had asked for something ordinary. Only one had been treated as a customer worth satisfying. The meal arrived on a black plastic tray that looked designed to appear more expensive than it was. A turkey wrap sat beside a sealed vegetable soup. The coffee came in a ceramic mug, though a dull film had already formed across the surface. Lena placed the tray in front of Marcus with both hands, neutral, but her fingers held the edge a second longer than necessary. "Is this from the same service batch as the other meals in this section?" he asked. "Yes." "I wasn't given that information." She stepped away as Claire entered through the frosted door. The tortilla felt warm near the surface, but firm and cold toward the center. One edge of the lettuce had turned brown. Moisture had gathered inside the packaging, and the place where the preparation label should have been showed a pale strip of adhesive. The fruit cup contained cloudy liquid. He removed the lid from the soup. A thin skin stretched across the top before breaking near the spoon. None of these food was unsafe. Together they required an answer. Marcus took several photographs, including the tray number printed beneath the bowl. Photography of service operations is discouraged. You have been given the same food offered to other guests in this section. Marcus looked up. That is part of my concern. Her face she restored the professional expression she wore at the entrance. I asked when it was prepared. Our kitchen follows approved procedures. I did the plate but through the date then the date easy to confirm. Claire's got dropped to the missing label. Marcus ran a thumb near the adhesive without touching the food. This one was removed. That is an assumption. It is an observation. He asked for a food thermometer. Claire gave a small laugh, as though he had made an unreasonable request in a room built around hospitality. Guests are not permitted an employee to verify the temperature equipment. I am asking the glasses. You are creating concern where none has been established. Marcus looked through the glass. A fresh tray of pastries had just been carried into the main lounge. A server removed the previous tray, even though several items remained. In the reserve section, Derek Sloan opened the refrigerated cart and instructed the existing meals before bringing out anything new. We are not opening another remains. The employee examined one container. The dates are gone. Derek lowered his voice, but Marcus still heard him. I don't have it. You don't need it to hand out a wrap. The employee hesitated. Derek took the container from her and placed it in a tray himself, without the uncertainty of someone encountering a mistake for the first time. Marcus watched the airport technician and the woman in scrubs. Claire followed his gaze. Yes. Stop serving this batch until the preparation time for instructions. Then consider it a request from a guest reporting a possible safety problem. Claire folded her arms. Seating assignments, menu, and now food handling. At some point, repeated objections affect the comfort of everyone around you. There it was again. The concern the client had become conduct. Has anyone complained about my behavior? Marcus asked. We monitor the overall environment. He felt the familiar pressure behind his ribs, but his voice stayed level. A safety report should be evaluated by the condition of the food. For a fraction of a second, Claire's composure cracked. She understood that he was not confused, intimidated, or willing to accept her wording. Then the expression disappeared. Lena, but Marcus placed one hand beside it without touching her or blocking the aisle. Do not throw it away. Claire looked toward the security desk beyond the glass. At that moment, an older black couple entered the reserve section. Walter Coleman leaned on a polished wooden cane while Denise guided him around a cart left partly in the aisle. Remained empty in the main lounge, but Lena had clearly been instructed to seat them in the rear, and checked his watch. We have time, he told Denise. I just need something to eat before I take my medication. Derek opened the same refrigerated cart, octosomes, with he'd lifted black label marks and carried it toward Walter's table. Marcus looked at his own untouched food, then at the older man preparing to eat from the same batch. Until that moment, observation had been enough. Marcus remained seated as Derek carried the tray toward Walter. The older man was still adjusting his canes beneath the table, giving Marcus a few seconds to think before the situation required him to act. His attention shifted to the digital clock above the servant. The tweet returned to him. Check donation log. Tem. He needed to understand what was happening behind that door, but he could no longer ignore the food moving toward Walter. Marcus rose slowly and crossed the narrow aisle. I would wait before eating that. Walter looked up, surprised but not alarmed. Denise examined the tray while Derek stopped beside the table. Please did not move seat, Derek said. Marcus have been removed from several meals in this batch. Denise lifted the fruit cup and turned it toward the light. Och is right. There should reach for the tray. We will replace it. Preserve it, Marcus said. Do not throw it away. Derek's service operations. Before Marcus could answer, a delivery alarm sounded behind the service door, then signaled to another employee to handle the tray. The interruption revealed more than he intended, where the frosted glass allowed him a partial view of the receiving corridor. Thorough had exactly unlocked the door and admitted two men wearing gray work shirts with no Horizon Crest identification. They pushed a flats later, Horizon Crest employees rolled out sealed cases of smoked salmon, imported cheese, premium sliced meat, and fresh pastries. Each case carried the company's supplier label. Derek attached a bright green's donation. Lena passed Marcus's table and quietly left her tablet on the edge for seconds. The screen displayed the day's donation log. Had been marked for charitable transfer. The receiving organization field was blank. The estimated value had been entered as 0. The food had arrived that morning and showed no sign of damage or expiration. Julie allowed surplus food to be donated, but only at inventory confirmation and written acceptance by an approved non-profit organization. They were part of the lounge's current weekly order. One of the gray-shirted men scanned no identification and signed no document. To the side by the cart, carefully excluding the empty signature box, then waved them through the service exit. The logo on its door belonged to Sloan Premier Events, a regional catering company Marcus recognized from an unsuccessful vendor application. Rachel's preliminary report had identified the company's registered owner as Derek's brother-in-law. As the van pulled away, another vehicle arrived. Its driver unloaded brown cartons containing lower-cost wraps, soup containers, and fruit cups. Several packages carried discount distributor labels rather than the approved Horizon Crest brand. Derek directed the new stock into a smaller refrigerator beside the reserve section. The arrangement became clear. Left under the false appearance of charitable giving. But to Lastow, inferior replacement through an unapproved supplier, and were served where complaints were least likely to survive, was not simply a product of bias. It was useful to the people profiting from that bias. Guessed at a convenient place to distribute food that could not withstand. Marcus photographed what he could, without exposing his position. Claire spoke into her radio while watching him. She did not appear interested in the delivery vehicles. On the black guest, the same questions. Marcus understood that Claire and Derek might not share the same purpose. Who represented the image of a premium lounge? Derek wanted to hide inventory theft, yet each depended on the other. Needed complaints look unreliable. Derek needed unreliable complainants. The system allowed both of them to continue. Lena returned for her tablet. The official donation form will be uploaded this afternoon. The signature is usually added later. Whose signature? Marcus asked. It changes. Has any approved charity received these deliveries? Not that I have seen. Claire entered the reserve section before Lena could say more. Mr. Bennett, you have repeatedly photographed staff operations after being advised not to. Marcus slipped his phone into his pocket. I photographed goods purchased by the companies serving me. Claire did not know how much he had seen had begun to disturb her composure. Your conduct is being documented. For the first time, Claire looked less irritated than afraid. Section. Until Marcus returned to his chair. She reminded Lena that guest conversations should remain limited to service needs. Attain to restore control with the deliberate control without revealing that control had already begun to slip. Lena waited several minutes before she reached as she spoke without looking at him. The hallway beside the restrooms has no oddly short time later, and walked toward the hallway carrying his canvas bag, creating the appearance of routine work. The corridor was narrow and quiet, separated from the lounge by two heavy doors. Up close, Marcus could see how tired she was. Her expression held more than fear. It carried the weariness of someone who had rehearsed it many times but had rarely been allowed to finish saying it. Two about missing food labels. Two about the unregistered van. One about additional verification for black guests. And one about Claire changing complaints. When the first was 10 months ago, Marcus asked what happened after she filed it. Lena gave a small, humorless smile. Nothing happened. Schedule had been reduced from 4 shifts to 2. She had been removed from the main entrance and assigned almost exclusively to the reserve section. Her application for management training disappeared from the system. When she asked Claire for an explanation, Claire told her that leadership positions required employees who supported the company's service direction. 2 weeks later, Lena's personnel file received describing her as resistant to brand standards and difficult to manage under pressure. A regional supervisor called during the call. "Were you allowed to speak privately?" "No." Lena opened a folded piece of paper hidden inside the towels. It contained 5 cases had been edited. One complaint involved a black woman who had been asked to prove she owned the credit card connected to her reservation. Denied a window seat despite several empty tables. A third came from an employee who saw Derek replacing supplier labels. Each report had been closed by Claire or reassigned to a category that "Why did you keep the numbers?" Marcus asked. "'Cause stories are easy to dismiss. Numbers are harder to erase if someone knows where they were." Her voice shook slightly at the final words, and she pressed her lips together for allowing the emotion to show. Marcus did not rush to reassure her, had likely taught her caution. "Why stay?" he asked instead. Lena leaned against the cabinet. "My mother worked in airport services for 30 years. She used to say the first person who sees a problem is often the person with the least authority to stop it. I thought if I stayed at least tell guests they were not imagining what was happening." She described a morning when an older black woman had asked why she could not sit near the windows. Claire told her the area was full, though several tables remained open. After the woman entered a note saying the guest displayed distrust toward routine seating management. The woman's accurates changed the defect. "When everyone who sees the pattern leaves," Lena said, "the pattern becomes the official story." Marcus felt the sentence settle heavily between them. Horizon Crest had policies against retaliation training. Yet none of those protections mattered if the same local managers controlled scheduling, evaluations, and the first review of complaints. "Do Claire and Derek know you submitted the photographs?" Marcus asked. "Claire has been checking employee phones. She thinks I am involved." "Is that why she is watching you today?" Lena nodded. "She also thinks you are encouraging the guests in reserve to ask anyone to complain. That does not matter. That you are influencing other guests." "Marcus, can you access the original versions?" "Not anymore, but the system keeps with regional access still delights it." Yesterday, Claire requested permission to purge duplicate records. The request explained why the inspection could not wait. Marcus folded the paper. He told Lena not to send any further messages from company equipment. Her decision without expectation of reward. "If they reduce your shifts again after today, document the time and the person who ordered it," he said. "You talk like someone who expects to matter. They should matter. That is not the same thing." "No," Marcus said. Claire's voice instructed Lena to return immediately. Before leaving, Lena warned Marcus that security had been placed on notice. Claire planned to Walters or Datis again. Marcus watched her walk back through the doors, shoulders straight, despite the fear visible in the way she held her hands. Rarely looked fearless. More often it looked like someone telling the truth, while knowing exactly what it might cost. When Marcus returned to the reserve section, Walter's tray had removed the lid from the soup, but had not allowed her husband to begin eating. She leaned close to the fruit cup, then turned her face off, she said. Walter checked his watch again. "I only need enough for the medication." Marcus saw Chidorg the nervous door, watching them while pretending to examine inventory. Claire stood behind the frosted glass, would be described later, and Marcus knew the first written version might not resemble the truth. Walter's table slowly. "Sir, please do not eat that until they confirm when it was prepared." "Sir." Walter looked from Marcus to the tray. "My meal came from the same cart." The date label was not consistent. The temperature was removed, and that pushed the tray several inches away from Walter. No one answered. Claire entered immediately. "Mr. Bennett, return to your seat." Marcus turned toward her. You have been told that our kitchen follows approved procedures. That is not verification. You are alarming an elderly guest. Denise's expression hardened. The nearby travelers became quiet. The black woman in hospital scrubs closed her laptop. The airport technician set down his coffee. But a flush had reached the base of her neck. Lena approached Walter's table. Derek stepped forward at the same time and reached for the food. Said, "Place it in a sealed bag and record the table number." Derek stopped. "You are not allowed instructions." Then treat it as a request from a guest who has reported a safety concern. "You have reported dissatisfaction," Claire said. Missing labels, inconsistent temperature, and the same batch being served to multiple people. The distinction mattered. A safety concern required documentation. Claire raised the radio. Security to the reserve section. Walter exhaled slowly, his hand tightening around the head of his cane. "I did not come here," Marcus replied. Neither Denise touched her husband's wrist. Her anger was controlled but unmistakable. "He needs to eat before taking his medication. Should not be difficult." Claire told them a replacement would be provided after Marcus returned to his seat. The condition revealed the true priority. Service would resume only after the questioning black man became quiet. A white businessman from the main lounge entered through the glass door. He had been seated close enough to observe the exchange. "I heard the whole thing," he said, never raised his voice. Claire's eyes sharpened. "Sir, please return to the main service area. You told security he was disrupting guests." Marcus noticed the room change. The witness had not solved the problem, and his words should not have been more valuable than Denise's or Lena's. But his refusal to remain silent removed one of Claire's easiest defenses. She could no longer claim that everyone around Marcus felt threatened. One was a black woman named Officer Renee Wallace. The other was a white man named Officer Paul Mercer. Officer Wallace asked Claire to interfere with service and encouraged others to challenge our procedures, Claire said. Officer Wallace asked. He was instructed to remain in his assigned area. Marcus gestured toward the floor. He approached other guests after being warned not to. "I warned a man about food from the same unlabeled batch I received." Officer Mercer looked at Walter's tray. "Has the food been inspected?" Claire, "Not the issue. They appear to be part of the issue," Officer Wallace said. Derek placed her hand the tray. "Denise taking this until somebody records what was served." Her voice was quiet, but it stopped him. "You do not understand how a premium lounge has to operate." Marcus felt the moment arrive. He had gathered enough to establish a pattern, but Walter Derek might destroy the clearest physical evidence. "You are right," Marcus said. "I do not understand why a valid ticket receives one standard in the main room and another behind this glass. I do not understand why you called security. And I do not understand why you everyone checked the food." Claire lifted her chin. "Marcus, you do not have his phone." "Then we should bring in the people who do." He unlocked the phone and called Rachel. He did not move away from the table. "Begin the Silvergate Plight Preservation Order," he said when she answered. "Preserve local edit days, access to guest security footage, and 12 months of inventory records. Freeze all vendor transactions connected to this lounge. No food documents the service area." Claire stared at him. "Suspends to the 2 partner lounges. Transfer guest. Refund today's access at charges and arrange safe meals for anyone who needs them." Claire stepped closer. "You cannot order my staff to close," Marcus said. "I am directing mine." The room became still. Though she had not yet understood the full meaning, a few minutes later, the main entrance opened, and Rachel entered with Thomas Reed, 2 food safety specialists, and a regional operations director. Rachel crossed the lounge without looking at Claire. "Mr. Bennett," she said. The words moved through the room faster than any announcement. Derek's hand fell away from the service cart. Claire stopped beside the coffee stations, searching his plain clothing for some explanation she had missed. Marcus Bennett, founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Rest Hospitality. Claire's lips parted, the confidence she had worn all morning fractured into disbelief. Marcus looked at the green access status still visible on Lena's tablet. "You knew I had a valid ticket." Claire began explaining that elevated verification protected guests and that Marcus's behavior had created an unusual situation. "You will have an opportunity to respond during the investigation. Right now, you are relieved of operational duties." Derek shifted toward the service corridor. Thomas instructed him to remain his access badge. "I need to retrieve personal property," Derek said. Thomas replied. Derek ignored him and moved toward the office carrying a black document bag. "Please place the bag on the table until company counsel confirms. It is personal property." Derek's jaw tightened. Thomas opened it in Derek's presence. Inside were blank donation forms, invoices from Sloan Premier Events, handwritten inventory lists, and a second company phone. Meanwhile, the food tea specialists, and Marcus's Walter's tray, and Marcus's untouched meal. They recorded temperatures, photographed the removed labels, and collected samples. The turkey wraps were below the required hot holding range but above safe refrigeration temperature. The soup had also remained outside its approved range long enough to require disposal. Rachel ordered every item from the same batch removed. Walter received a sealed meal from an airport restaurant and waited before taking his medication. Latisse watched the process, though her expression remained guarded. An apology could not erase how close the situation had come to being dismissed. "Thank you for asking for specific taking action." Officer Wallace nodded. "A report is not evidence by itself." Marcus turned toward Claire. He did not fire her everyone, in front of the lounge. He did not permit employees to surround Derek or turn the moment into public humiliation. And their statement scheduled, representation available. The Lena's schedule and Cremployee file frozen to prevent retaliation. Every employee with the investigation would not affect future assignments. Claire seemed almost offended by the fairness. Marcus extended to her. "After what you think I did, you are giving me a formal review?" she asked. "Fair process is not a benefit reserved for people, i.e. Marcus. It is the standard you should have given every guest and employee here." Travelers were escorted to partner lounges while staff placed closure notices at the entrance. As though the revelation had transformed the meaning of everything they had witnessed. He understood the danger in that reaction, because a CEO received it. The treatment had not become wrong because the person targeted owned the company. His title only gave him the power to stop what should have been stopped for anyone. Before leaving, Marcus looked at the polished Horizon Crest sign above the entrance. Claire had spent the morning protecting the image beneath that name while allowing the promise, he told Rachel. To protect the people, the brand failed. The glass doors locked. For the first time that day, the system stopped serving two versions of reality. Though Marcus understood the investigation within the first few days that Silvergate was not the work of one careless manager or one dishonest supplier. 12-month FUBs of security footage, 12 FUBs, employee schedules, vendor payments, seat assignments, survey exclusions, and the edit history of every complaint marked incomplete or irregular. The evidence learned how to hide itself behind ordinary language. Nearly 180 complaints had been shortened, reclassified, or closed without independent review. Black guests were several times more likely than white guests. They were also likely additional verification. They were also more likely to be placed in the reserve section and assigned behavior notes after questioning service decisions. The records did not contain openly offensive language, such as pretentious-civic, observation, resistance to seating, guidance sensitivity, and unusual sensitivity. Each phrase sounded neutral when read alone. The creator created a map of unequal treatment. Derek's financial records showed that premium food Daristentian Duelers had been transferred through false donation entries and resold by Sloan Premier Events. Bakta. Several batches lacked proper preparation records, and foods nearing expiration had been directed disproportionately to the reserve section. Derek had not invented the bias, but he had recognized its usefulness. He were less likely to survive review. Claire's role was different but equally serious. That she received money from Derek's operation. They did find that she repeatedly altered complaints, restricted service based on his shifts, after internal reports were filed. Her choices protected an image of exclusivity, while also protecting Derek's theft from meaningful scrutiny. Both were given written allegations, access to the evidence relevant to them, and time to roughs. After the review, Horizon Crest terminated their employment, Derek's financial records to the appropriate authorities, and the company filed a civil claim against Sloan Premier Events. Claire retaliation, inaccurate reporting, and failure to respond properly to food safety warnings. Marcus refused to describe the result as victory. Did not repair the conditions that had allowed them to operate. Horizon Crest had approved the software permissions. Regional leaders had Silvergate's clean numbers. The company had created a reporting, but allowed local managers to channel to the control schedules and first-stage reviews, whose names appeared most often beyond the people. The reserve section was dismantled. The frosted partition came down, and every part of the lounge received equal access to electrical outlets, windows, and the full menu. Employees had to select a specific documented reason. Employees had unusual verification, and every unusual verification was reviewed weekly for demographic patterns. Food safety reports went directly to compliance, while retaliation protections automatically froze protections and evaluations during an investigation. 2 approvals, digital confirmation from independent receiving organization, and photographs showing product condition and vehicle identification. Marcus also scores measured performance. Horizon scores could no longer exclude guests simply because a manager classified their visit as irregular. We're required to examine not only averages but differences between. A high score would no longer be accepted if it depended on removing the least convenient voices. The note describing her as difficult to manage was deleted, and her 4-shift schedule returned. Marcus offered her the position of Service Integrity Ticker Program, a 1-year leadership coordinator. It was not a dramatic leap into senior management. It was a real role with authority review reports, speak direct compliance, and help redesign training based on what frontline employees actually experienced. Lena asking whether she would be allowed to disagree with the problem. Executives. Gaffed. Punishing and Denise received a personal apology, reimbursement for their travel expenses, and an invitation to review the new accessibility layout before reopening. Agreed. Only after making clear that the person who will never meet you, she told Marcus. That is how we will know you learned something. On reopening morning, wearing the same old jacket and carrying the same canvas bag, Lena stood at the entrance in a new Navy uniform with her original name badge still pinned above the pocket. Your ticket is villaged green, she said. Welcome to Horizon Crest. No additional identification was requested. Marcus entered and saw Walter and Denise seated near the windows. The hospital worker from his first visit is buzzed and outed beside a bright table. Travel a different buffet, the same seating choices, and the same expectation of respect. Marcus understood that one good morning could not prove a system had changed. Through ordinary days when no executive was watching. He looked back at Lena. That is how it should have been for everyone. A company did not prove its values by recognizing the most powerful person in the room. It proved them by respecting the person employees. Respect was not an upgrade, a loyalty benefit, or a reward for status. Down. If this story made you think differently about by liking and subscribe, tell us which moment stayed with you most and where you are watching from.